But no, this will be great. You be yourself, relax, say anything you want. Live from Salt Lake City, this is Heart of the Matter, where we do all we can to worship God in spirit and truth. I'm your host, Shawn McCraney. Excited, really excited about our guest tonight, Brian Diggs, and I'm going to introduce him in just a second. A couple things before we get to our esteemed guest. First of all, regarding our work with the Transversional Apostolic Record, which we introduced a few weeks ago, we thank those of you who have stepped up to assist us in that and offered assistance in that. For your prayers and everything, and financial support. We need more, even if it's a prayer a month and $1 a month. You know, we're building up for that 5-year plan to get that thing done. And so it's a Herculean task, but it's worth it. And I just want to let you know that what we're going to do is we're going to get that Gospel of Mark out by the end of December to everybody who is behind it, and so that you can see it and decide if you want to continue to be behind it or not. So I just wanted to let you know that everything's in the works, including those everything we talked about online about it. But I didn't want you to think that that's not happening. It is definitely happening behind the scenes. So, excuse me. Before I introduce Brian, I want to tell you a really quick history. Years ago, I used to live in a place called Mill Creek. It's here in Salt Lake, and there's a gym in Mill Creek called Planet Fitness, and I would work out in there, and I would see this totally fit, ripped Wolverine kind of guy just doing curls and looking all handsome there in the gym. And so I would go, and we sort of started talking and stuff, and found out he's a believer, and I asked him one time to come on our show. I think we were on TV at that time. And he just politely said, "Oh, you don't want me on your show." And so, you know, that was my first introduction to the guy. And so then later on, some mutual friends of him and my family, the Symes, Kelly and Alan, they said, "Hey, we have a friend, and he goes by the Deacon of Doom, and he's a wrestler, and he gets into the ring. Do you want to go watch?" And so we said, yeah. And so my daughter and my son-in-law and my wife and I, we went to the event, and he did a great job, and it was the guy from the gym. So that was great. And then a few weeks ago, time has passed, years, maybe, I don't know how long ago, and I guess that we ran into each other in an airport in Long Beach too with his wife and talked then. So our guest and I have had crossings for quite a while. And then last week, I've been looking for someone to get on and talk about objective religion. And what I'm talking about by that are people who think that or believe that, are convinced that the way they do religion is the truth and has to be imparted to other people, versus subjective faith, which I believe is what people believe in their heart they practice with God. And it doesn't matter necessarily how much doctrinal praxis is involved. It's up to them. So this guy online says, "I'll do it." And I didn't know him, and so I looked up his Facebook, and it said he did some wrestling. I didn't put two and two together, but bottom line, Kelly Syme tells me through Facebook, "That's our friend who we took you to that wrestling match." And now our paths have crossed again. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Brian Diggs.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us. Now, we planned on Brian taking 15 minutes, me taking 15 minutes, and we would just sort of present something, and then we'd sit down and talk. But no. That is changing radically tonight. In fact, we're going to do 2 parts at least with Brian. We're not talking about some slacker who's got some ideas on the armchair here. We're talking about a man who is fervent in his beliefs. He knows his stuff, and he's not afraid to say it. And I mean, my hat's already off to him just for being this kind of person. We want people who speak it, the truth about whatever it is, and to be able to dialogue as friends, which we are, and we'll go from there. But I just want to read a little bit about Brian. Reverend Brian Diggs is the director of UMCOR, the United Methodist Director of Relief. West Office and Depot in Salt Lake City. UMCOR West is a disaster response center that utilizes volunteers across the country to build, shelve, and send relief supplies to populations affected by natural disaster. Brian is responsible for overall operations of UMCOR, including the scheduling of volunteers, general office administration responsibilities, and securing materials needed for volunteer work teams. Reverend Diggs has over 20 years of experience leading United Methodist congregations of North Carolina, Virginia, and Utah into deeper action around mission. This is really, this is guided language, what we're reading here. He has been director of UMCOR West office since it opened in 2009, so that's 9 years ago. Prior to working at UMCOR, Brian served as senior pastor at First Methodist Church in Salt Lake City for 10 years. So he's not a greenback. This guy knows what he's talking about relative to his opinions, right? And then Reverend Diggs is an ordained clergy person, which is a great way to say it, in the Mountain Sky Annual Conference, and received his MDiv, that's a Master's of Divinity, from Duke Divinity School in Durham, North Carolina. And his focus was on liturgy as ethical formation, which, if I understand that right, would mean that it is the belief, and you can correct me on this, it's the belief that through proper liturgical exercise and practice, that morality and ethics are enhanced in the community. Is that correct?
Very well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk.
All right.
Brian Diggs, tell us, go back. You were born to parents and siblings and all that.
Yeah, so I was born in southern Florida, southeastern southern Florida. 50 years ago, this Sunday, I'll be 50, believe it or not. Yeah, I'm excited about that
great.
and nervous about that. But yeah, I was born to my mother and father, and I had one biological sister. Then my parents divorced when I was 4. My mother remarried to one of now 2 fathers that I have. You know, in the church, I always say, water's thicker than blood, because the waters of baptism make us family. Oh. So I have two people that I call dad. And I was raised up until 2nd grade in southern Florida with my biological sister, my mom, and my stepsister. Huh. And so I was the middle child at that point. But at 2nd grade, my dad decided to get us out of the rat race of southern Florida and moved us to southern Arkansas, near Hot Springs. Wow. LA, as we call it, lower Arkansas.
Yeah.
Where I was raised, and I was raised a Methodist. I've always been a Methodist. I was raised a Methodist there. My running joke is, being an Arkansan, I was raised Southern Baptist. I just went to a Methodist church on Sundays because the culture was so Southern Baptist, very much like the culture in Utah is very LDS.
Okay.
But in a sense, I always felt like on some level, most of the Baptists felt like the Methodists weren't really Christian, because the pastor did weird things like he wore a robe and we lit candles and said these liturgies, which seemed to be very Catholic. And in the 80s in Arkansas, especially in Protestant Arkansas, they weren't sure the Catholics really were Christians at that point. So that's how I was raised. I went through high school there. And by the way, to kind of step back, my biological father was in Virginia at the time, and I would go see him in the summers, and he was a Methodist pastor as well.
Wow.
So I would go see him for about a month and a half in the summers. I'd see him for a couple weeks at Christmas growing up. And I really believe God used him as an influence on my decision to, well, I would say it's my decision, but maybe it wasn't, but to go into the ministry. So as a junior in high school, I made the decision to go into the ministry.
Wow.
I went to college only because I had to go to college, to go to seminary.
Got it.
When I entered seminary, I really thought, I'm only going to seminary so I can be a preacher. And I really realized how undereducated I was when I got my first paperback at Duke, and I spelled the prophet Jeremiah, Profit. So I knew I was kind of screwed, My only claim to fame is I was smart enough to know that I was well over my head. Huh. So I found the smartest group of kids I could find, hung out with them, listened to everything they said, took all their classes, and by the time I graduated. I had straight A's and had a pretty good education. So, yeah, that's my story. I served 3 years while in seminary in North Carolina. Served 3 years in Virginia before coming out here to Salt Lake City in 1997, where I've been ever since.
Wow. In terms of a born-again experience, the way evangelicals talk about it, was that part of your experience?
Well, as a Southerner, if it's not, you're going straight to hell, right? So, but I can honestly say no. I really wanted that. Yeah. In fact, there are a lot of people who, I really felt jealous because all my Baptist friends every year would go to Glorieta, New Mexico to their Southern Baptist church camp and get saved. And
every year.
Every year. They'd come back and, they were really on fire for Jesus, for about 3 weeks, and then their salvation seemed to slip away. And so I would always have these theological dialogues with my friends because they were all, Baptist. So they were like, once saved, always saved.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, well, I thought you were saved last year.
Yeah.
And they said, well, I thought I was too, but I really was. But this time, know. So, but no, I never had that kind. I had emotional experiences, and that was a part of the Christian aura in terms of how I was raised. It was almost like if you didn't cry, you weren't really a Christian. And then seminary, of course, and the aging changed all that as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, in terms of type of kid, high school, junior high, high school, college, athletics, academia, partier, strict by the line Christian boy.
None of that really.
What were you? Tell us.
Well, I took my wife to my 30-year high school reunion last summer, and 50% of the class was there, which is 12. So it's a very small area, so we all had to do everything. So we were all athletic. But we took our shoulder pads off at halftime and marched in the band so we could have a band.
Wow.
So it's not like, everybody there were no cliques because there weren't enough people. There weren't. So in a sense, I got to know a little bit about music, sports, academics, all that stuff. My joke is I was number 11 in the class, but when you only have like 20, it's not that great, So but no one has to know that I was number 11 in the class.
Let's stick by that one.
Yeah.
So tell us if you can summarize the Methodist faith, and just for our audience who doesn't know, and that includes me completely, origins, and then the differences of approaches to Methodism, if that's possible to do. Yeah, go ahead.
Almost impossible.
Yeah.
No, I would say that I'm a by-the-book Methodist. In terms of Sunday mornings, and also theologically I am. But Methodism has a kind of an interesting past, because we were talking before the show started, would you have more of a Calvinist bent? And I was like, absolutely not, So, I'm sure most of your viewers are familiar with the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s and Luther, and so Methodists are more along the lines of the Anglo-Catholic Lutheran kind of vein of theology.
Got it.
So the story goes is that John Wesley was an Anglican priest in the 1700s when the Church of England decided to break off from the Catholic Church. So the Reformation had already happened.
Okay. And
Wesley was a part of the Anglican Church, and he was really trying to get Anglicans to be much more methodical much more serious about their not just beliefs but also practices. In fact, when he was in college at Oxford, he was kind of a derogatory term. He's so methodical. Let's call him a Methodist, and it kind of stuck. So it was meant to be a cut down, but interestingly enough, it became kind of the name of a movement within Anglicanism, or what we would now know in the United States as the Episcopal Church.
Wow.
So, to make a long story short, the Revolutionary War happened, and the Methodists were already here. That they considered themselves Anglicans, but when the colonies broke off from England, we kind of became our own denomination. And really, what happened was there were no priests to go around, and so the founder of our particular faith, John Wesley, decided to ordain somebody as a bishop, which was a no-no because we believed in apostolic succession, but because he wanted the things like the sacraments, baptism and Eucharist or Holy Communion, to be able to get to the people, he went ahead and baptized, even though he was not a bishop himself, consecrated a bishop.
Wow.
So that we could actually create and ordain more priests or pastors to serve the people. So it was a pastoral move on Wesley's part. But it really set the DNA, I think, for Methodism, because that kind of rule-breaking, in a sense, was great on one level, but it also kind of contributed to the DNA of Methodism, which said, oh, the rules aren't really that important, so if we need to change something, do with it. So you run the risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater when you do that. And that's kind of where Methodism is now. So if I can talk about that. So Methodism is all over the board. We're almost like a chameleon faith. So if you're in Arkansas, the Methodist Church might seem more Southern Baptist, but if you're in New York, it might seem more Roman Catholic. Of course, out west, it seems much more Unitarian Universalist.
Wow.
So we're kind of all over the map. So when I speak, I can honestly say I speak as kind of a by the book United Methodist.
Which you referred to earlier as the high church.
Depends on what you mean by high church. I would say.
When I think of high church, I think of an Anglican priest. That's what I'm thinking of high church.
No, I would say, I'd probably use the word more traditional. So I think you can use, and that's a tricky word too, because with the job I have, I get to preach at a lot of churches around the West. I've gone from your area of the country and the coast of California all the way to Maryland and preach sermons.
Wow.
And I've seen, which means I've seen all kinds of Methodist churches. And you hear terms like, well, we have a traditional service at 11, but we have a contemporary service at 8:30. What they really mean is, are we going to sing hymns or are we going to sing praise songs?
That's it.
They don't really mean traditional in the sense that I mean traditional.
Got it.
So I know when I walk into a Methodist church, if the offering is before the sermon, I know the pastor doesn't know much about liturgy or doesn't have the guts to change it.
Wow.
One of the two.
Wow.
So what I mean by is the actual structure words. Here's what I would say. If somebody says, do you believe in diversity in worship? My response is absolutely. I think sometimes we could say the Apostles' Creed instead of the Nicene Creed. But only if there's a baptism.
Awesome. So you're pretty woo, right?
Or I believe the bread could be leavened or unleavened.
Oh, wow.
But what I don't believe is that we're not going to have the Eucharist or communion every week.
Got it.
Yeah.
In terms, just for my knowledge and the audience, when you take the Lutherans, I'm just going to lump all of this. The Catholics, the Lutherans, Orthodoxy, and High Methodists, if we can use that term, whatever you are, what's the major differences that we're talking about here?
Between what I believe and what?
And Lutherans? Just the major difference. Does it come down to liturgy, or does it come down to theology? What are we talking about?
It comes down to theology with Presbyterians.
Presbyterians, I didn't include them.
Yeah.
No, Orthodoxy, Catholics, Lutherans, Episcopalians.
Yeah. That's a pretty. That's the strain of theology we fall in. Most good Orthodox or Roman Catholics would say, not so fast. You need to become Roman Catholic or Orthodox, which they're right. If they're taking their faith seriously.
Right.
But in terms of the broad, paint stroke, the brush, that's all kind of in the same thing.
Same thing.
So, for example, with the Eucharist, while Roman Catholics believe in what they call transubstantiation, meaning Christ is actually, that is the body and blood of Christ on the table.
Yeah.
Methodists would have much more of an Eastern Orthodox understanding, which we would say, well, Christ is truly present in the bread and the wine. But we're not about to explain how that happens.
Got it. So how about baptism? Is it required by Methodist hands to do it for it to be efficacious, or?
I just don't want to get into questions of salvation with baptism.
Not questions of salvation, but
in terms of being a Christian, yes, it's required.
In terms of being a Christian.
Yeah, that would be a difference between you and me.
But not in terms of salvation.
Right, I think there are plenty of baptized people who, for example, if you said, there's this really nice person over here who's much nicer than me, and there are lots of people that are, I told you my, humility is not my greatest virtue. I think there are a lot of people who are much nicer than me, who are not baptized. I don't believe they're Christian because they're not baptized. I don't believe that means heaven or hell for them. In fact, if anybody has a greater chance of being in hell, it's Christians themselves, because they have something and somebody to reject, if that makes sense. So all these evangelical arguments about, what about the in deepest, darkest Africa with such and such a tribe. They've never heard Jesus' name. Are they going to heaven? I mean, I tend to think we should concentrate on ourselves. But to answer your question, there's no such thing as a Christian who's not baptized. And that might be a difference between...
So no such thing as a Christian who's not baptized, but a person who's not baptized, you're not making any statement about their salvation.
Not at all.
So then what's the difference? What's the point of being a Christian if salvation is not hanging in the balance?
Because Methodists don't have such an individualistic understanding of the faith. So for example, most Protestants, let me switch that. Most non-traditional evangelical Protestants see the church as a place that people can go that helps them to undergird or upbuild their faith. To build up their faith. So it's a consumeristic mindset.
Okay.
Whereas most Orthodox Roman Catholics and good Lutherans and Methodists and Episcopalians believe the church does not exist to serve us, but we exist to serve the church, because the church is the vehicle that God in Christ has chosen to transform the world. So as John Wesley once said, the founder of Methodism, there's no such thing as a solitary Christian. It's impossible. So that'd be a major difference.
Major difference with me, especially.
Yeah, definitely.
So, wow.
This is why I think Mormons more closely approximate Christianity than a lot of Protestant faiths do.
Yeah.
Because Mormons actually believe they exist to serve the church because they believe the church exists to save the world.
Right.
That's actually a very Christian view.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Right. So that being said, so I'm going to open up a can of worms here. Your understanding or view of modern day evangelicalism is what?
I told you I wasn't going to cuss.
I still baited
and I'm
that.
not.
Get the beeper ready.
No, in all seriousness, I think modern day evangelicalism is no different than Joel Osteen.
Okay.
It's all the same load of crap. Because they all see the church as something, like for example, but even many people in my own faith, they tend to see Sunday morning as something, like here's an example. Like when I was at First United downtown, once a year I would say, Happy New Year, everybody. It was always the first Sunday before of Advent, which is the 4 Sundays before Christmas.
Okay.
And they'd be like, what is he talking about? And I'd be like, well, let me just remind you once again of the Christian year. The Christian year starts 4 Sundays before Christmas, and maybe you've not heard of the Christian year, but like Lent, for example, goes to Easter, Advent goes to Christmas. And so in the more traditional churches, this is a way of telling the story of Jesus, right? So we systematically read the scriptures because we're trying to place people into the narrative of this story of salvation. Okay. So I would explain that, and then I would say, and how many people here are hoping that this Sunday I'm going to make Jesus relevant to you? And they would all raise their hand. And I would be like, I think maybe we should just go down to coffee hour and just have some cookies, because I'm not really interested in making Jesus relevant to any of you all. And they would be like, what is he talking about? But then I would quickly say, my goal is not to make Jesus relevant to you, or you. But my goal is to help us become relevant to Jesus. And that is why I say conservatives and liberals are two sides of the same coin, because they both believe in a consumeristic mind kind of understanding of Sundays, as opposed to serving the church because God's chosen the church to serve and save the world.
And the idea that God has chosen the church to save the world is extracting passages from the New Testament and using them in that way. That's where you're getting that from. Are you getting this also from church history and the things that men have said?
I'm getting it from the church's tradition, which is a holy tradition.
Yeah.
And the Bible reflects that tradition.
And the Bible reflects that too.
For example,
yeah.
if you read 1 Timothy chapter 3,
okay.
The Bible, here's what I would say to people. The Bible never says the Bible is the pillar of all truth, but the Bible does say the church in 1 Timothy 3 is the pillar of all truth.
Okay.
So,
and that is translated, those called out of, I guess, presumably the world, the church, the ecclesia. So I'm not. Is that's kind of my thing, Brian? Is that we're called out, and what you're kind of describing with Orthodoxy or Catholicism or any of that is drawing everyone back in. And so where you guys might be a body and you're worshiping as a body, and you say it's not for the individual to experience Jesus, it's for the body to serve Jesus as a church. I'm not so sure. I mean, you use church in Timothy, but I'm not so sure when we look at what it originally meant that translates to what you're saying. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I just
Let me challenge you.
Yeah, challenge me.
The people who gave you that particular scripture believed what I'm saying. That is the key. Another way to put it. I always tell, so this organization I run now, we have a Eucharistic or communion service every Friday before they leave. And I always say, I don't know you guys very well, but when you meet somebody new, it's always important to talk politics and religion. And they laugh, Yeah. And so I ask them a question: what came first, the Constitution of the United States of America or the people? And they were like, well, the people. I was like, exactly. How does it start off? We the people in order to ... whatever else it says, right?
Got it.
And then I ask another question. I say, what came first, the church or the Bible? And we always get it right because I make sure they know. When Paul wrote the book of Romans, he was writing to the church in Rome.
Right.
Corinthians to the church in Corinth. So, and this is a church that already has baptism and Eucharist. They already believe that they exist.
Sure.
They're almost cultish. In fact, the Moonies of the first century were the Christians. So I do believe, I'm probably a lot more tribalistic in the sense that I don't think the church can address the world unless we first address what it means to be church.
Okay. And so when you say tribalistic, explain that a little bit more. I don't understand what you mean.
It's mostly liturgical. So I would say I want to be a part. Well, here's an example. So it's more than just liturgy. It's the kinds of ritualistic practices that have to take place within community that form us ethically.
Okay.
So if you remember
your thesis.
So if you remember the Amish schoolgirl shooting several years ago, right? What was shocking to a lot of Americans is that this Amish community, many of them could actually go to the funeral of the man who killed their daughters. I personally couldn't do that. And the reason I say I couldn't do that, even though I claim to be a pacifist, is because I don't belong to the kind of Christian community that engages in the kinds of practices that would allow me to not want to kill that SOB, but instead go to his funeral. So, in a sense, tribalism, or the cult, in a sense, I don't use the cult, I use the cult in much more of in an antiseptic way, right? But the cult of the table, in a sense, so the Eucharist or baptism then forms us and shapes us ethically. So when we practice those faiths, or you and I are probably close to the same age, you probably remember wax on, wax off.
Sure.
Right? Mr. Miyagi was trying to teach Daniel's son not waxing cars, but instead he was teaching him how to fight.
Right.
And those are the kinds of practices that I think Christians are called to engage in on Sunday mornings and beyond, but always living in community that allows them to be, for example, nonviolent. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. And I hear my friend Christopher, the priest, his sentiments are being echoed by what you're saying right now.
Right.
Because he has a very similar approach to, in fact, he could be called, goes back way back to the old stuff, and he practices because no one wants to do it, but he believes that there is a power to help form the individual and the community in doing those liturgical practices. So I see what both of you are saying. The thing I wonder about, though, is what about the idea of people who they have a duty of church going, but that's all it is, man. And I sense, having come from Mormonism, when you have a body serving the church, you get the idea sometimes showing up to church and doing the 3-hour block, which they don't do anymore, that you've done your duty, and now you can be a prick to your neighbor when you're driving out, in the car, and he gets in your way. And there's a sense sometimes that I feel that comes with serving the church, where people begin to feel that they've done their churchin', they've done their God stuff, and so then I'm not sure it always translates the best into the human heart. Can you kind of diffuse that or refute that for me?
Sure, I can.
Do it.
I'll do like Father. Yeah, like Christopher. Yes, I can. No, sure. I don't think it's a condom. I mean, I don't think that really is an attack upon the church as much as it is upon the church failing people or people failing the church. So in other words, I don't think that it's in a sense it kind of negates the necessity to come around the Eucharistic table any more than, if you have Americans who are not very patriotic, just go through the motions. You would never say, is America really that important? Maybe we shouldn't be standing for, what's it called at sporting events that people stand?
The national anthem.
National anthem, yeah. I was taught not to stand for that, or not to pledge allegiance in seminary, by the way.
Wow.
That's something we can talk more about as well. But
wow.
So you would never say to anybody who didn't stand, let's just, screw the national anthem. People are not really into it, right? It's not in their heart. You would say, as a people called American, this is what we do. These are the kinds of ritualistic practices that form us as Americans.
And what I would say to that is that as a vet who lost his leg in the Vietnam War, and I watch a bunch of high school kids who don't even know what it means standing and doing the Pledge of Allegiance or the national anthem, I would say, you don't know what it means to really be an American. And I'm insulted by the fact that you do a ritual every time the flag comes out at a sporting event because you're American, when in your heart, if we went to war, you'd probably all become pacifists and run from this place. I wonder just about the human nature to embrace culture and use it to our advantage to appease our need to have a relationship with God. That's why, Brian, I am a Christian anarchist, and why I am a subjectivist and think that the scripture supports the idea that God gets tired of sacrifices and rivers of oil and the praise at, over at the church where it's just a rock and praise show, because it's hypocrisy. It's just, yes, you can partake of the Eucharist, and maybe there is something to what you say, it helping form the ethics of the person in some people, but I'm just not sure. It doesn't do more harm than good. Coming out of Mormonism, freaking those people, they can do church all day long, they play church, but they are SOBs in the end, and I can't see the translation as being beneficial. That's why I think there is such a decline in liturgy in America, that churches have gone the route of the Protestants because at least it's more entertaining. But defend it. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, you're wrong because the church says you're wrong.
Oh, yes!
Yeah. So it's not really a matter of
Thank you. I love that.
So it's not really a matter of my opinion.
Right.
So, I just want to get that out front. Because I'm speaking because really you're talking to a guy who 100% of the time is in total disbelief, and 100% of the time is, if I got to believe it, I might as well believe pretty smartly, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like if you were to say to me, is Jesus your personal Lord and Savior? Are you going to heaven? Do you love Jesus? I'm not sure I don't know how to answer that kind of question, to be honest with you. I mostly experienced Jesus in community. But that being said, to answer your question, I always tell people, you'd never know the person of Jesus if it weren't for the church who gathered on Sunday mornings, who gave you the scriptures, who believed not only that baptism was, for example, necessary to be a Christian, but believed you had to actually have behaved well enough to come to the Eucharist on Sunday mornings. So the people who gave you Jesus believe what I'm saying. That's why I told you earlier, I don't see a difference between you and a fundamentalist Christian. Like we both know Greg Johnson, for example. I mean,
know and love.
I haven't seen him in many years. But Greg and I have battled on Facebook, right? You know, but I mean, in the end, epistemologically speaking, or kind of in terms of the reason and the academic structure, the paradigm of thought, it's the same. I mean, I don't see a difference between, you know, people like you and the Unitarian pastor. Because if you're going to claim Jesus, and if you're at all going to claim scriptures, if you claim Jesus, you got to say, well, how do we get that? Where did it come from? And it only came from a people who very definitely believed that if you want to follow Jesus, you must be baptized in, I mean, there, for example, I don't know if you've heard of the Didache before, or Hippolytus's apostolic tradition. The
Can't say it, but heard of it.
Yeah. I mean, these are liturgical texts that were written at the same time many of the, for example, New Testament texts that we claim as Bible were written. Or to put it differently, most Christians throughout almost at least 75% of Christian history didn't have Bibles.
Right.
And even if they did, they couldn't have read them.
Right.
Because most people were illiterate.
Right.
Right? So how do people know the story of Jesus? The Mass, the divine liturgy of Orthodoxy, and later on Protestants. So there is no Jesus without the church. I mean, there is. But Jesus chose the church, in my humble but correct opinion, chose the church to show forth the reality of the Trinity, which is most clearly seen in the Eucharist.
So, Brian, just to throw this out, my eschatology alters that view completely, in that I believe that, and I won't go into all of it, but that Jesus said he was coming back to take his bride, and came back and took his bride. The gates of hell did not prevail against it while it was under apostolic rule. And they knew that, and they all talked about him coming back quickly. And that he came back when he said Jerusalem was destroyed. That was it. Josephus echoes in his secular histories and things about all that being fulfilled from Matthew 24. And then, even before he came back and took his bride, when the apostles were still wandering, we were headed into decline in the church you're upholding as having been passed down through the body and through the Mass. I think it was corrupted. I think the early church fathers, you know, while good and great, I think it was corrupted then. And I think we have seen nothing but the gates of hell prevail against the church. That's why we have such bifurcated or split apart belief systems. And that's why we have so many different views of Methodism and Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and even everything is just 10,000 different ways to do it. And I think all of them have been bastardized, because when he took his church, the New Testament, according to Jeremiah, was now written on the heart. So I don't think it was the Mass. I don't think it was the body. I think it was God writing his laws upon the hearts and minds of individuals, which is what he calls the New Testament. Paul says, listen, we're the apostles of the New Testament, not written with ink. Like you said, the Bible wasn't even working for most people. So the Spirit that is on the individual, the masses getting together under the control of men and their ideas, has shown us nothing but corruption. I have yet to see, I don't know the history of Methodism, but I mean, even its Genesis, Wesley did something that wasn't in his right? He started off by ordaining someone he had no right to do it with. I had to see anything that proves that we've had a successful Christian faith move through the ages, except in the individual. Except in the individual who comes to know God by faith, the Spirit's on them, and they walk the life because he is in them.
How would you ever know what the life is?
He's in you.
Who told you that?
The Spirit.
Who told you there's a Spirit?
Do you need to know when you look to the skies and you forgive your neighbor when you otherwise would have punched him in the face? Do you have to? This solves the Aboriginal problem right away.
Why is that a good thing?
It's a great thing, because you have relationship with your Creator. He in you teaches you to love.
Who told you he was the Creator?
He did.
How?
By his Spirit. He renews your mind.
What if I told you the devil just lied to you?
Well, I mean, this comes to the other side of the rub. I get that there's problems with it, and I get that there's people who say the Spirit has told me to kill you.
Now, here's, let me tell you something.
Let's do it.
All right. A few years ago, I found myself at a church event in Topeka, Kansas, right? Mm-hmm. So I took it upon myself. I was with my best friend. We went over to, what the heck's the name of that church I hate so much? Westboro Baptist Church.
Oh, wow. I'd love to get them on the show.
Right. But of course, the whole place was just like, barricade. They had like iron gates and cameras and stuff. It said stuff like God hates fags and God hates America and all this stuff. The cool thing was right across the street from there, somebody had painted their house in rainbow colors.
Oh, my
it was great, right? And so
Brave
there was
people.
like a little piece, like offering box, if you want to like stop these idiots, So I thought it was great. But I guarantee you one thing.
Yeah.
If I walked into that church, if they would have let me in, say it was a Sunday morning, they were having a worship service, and I walked in, and I was like, Gabe, whatever those dudes' names are, I forgot their last names. Mm-hmm. High fives, I'm with you guys, and we all started having our little Bible study in church and all that. They believe that the Spirit has talked to them in the exact same way that you just said it, right? Mm-hmm. They believe that they're being good Christians. Mm-hmm. They believe not only they being good Christians, I mean, they are following the Scripture. They have a relationship with Jesus. They're mm-hmm. saved. Mm-hmm. The Spirit's in them. Mm-hmm. Are you telling me that if they believe that Spirit is in them, that Spirit's in them? And if that's the case, why is it not a good thing to punch somebody out? Because they would do that.
Brian, my point is that the Spirit in us would be manifested by the Spirit of love, which is defined by the Word. If those Westboro Baptists would be opening their Bibles to prove that their views are true, they'd be turning to Romans to show you that homosexuality is just horrible. They would be script. I know that they're more Bible-led than they are Spirit-led, because the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, and that love is long-suffering and it's kindness, patience. So they are an absolute antithetical in what they do to what the Word and the Spirit actually move someone to do. Jesus said, they will know if you're my disciple if you love one another. And that is certainly not love. So we would know automatically that if they're claiming the Spirit and they're saying God hates fags, we've got a problem, right?
Not according to them.
Not according to them.
That's my point.
You're right. And I would give them the benefit of the doubt to say, you can go that way. You can go that way. I am not going to say a word.
I wouldn't give them an inch is the difference.
Yeah.
Because I believe in the church.
Right.
You believe.
I don't think the church has solved our problem. Because let me ask you some questions.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, do.
I don't like when people, liberals or conservatives, use words like love and grace and that don't adhere, that don't believe in the church. And here's why. If I walked into the Republican National Convention in 2020, and I had a "Make America Great" shirt again. By the way, I hate him.
I'm not political, so I'm trying to keep up.
I'm extremely, because I'm a Christian, I have to be.
Oh my gosh, you and I are, what? Yeah. You're joking there.
Absolutely not. No. I mean, I don't.
No, wait, before, you told me that you hate it when people take politics and attach Christianity to it.
No, I hate when they attach America to the church because it only hurts the church.
Americans.
But Christians. Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem with the American church is that it's more American than it is Christian.
Okay.
So therefore, we tend to, we're willing to kill other people in other countries in the name of a country, even if we're a Christian. So we'll kill other Christians in other countries,
Not good.
So not good to me, right?
Right.
Because I'm a pacifist.
Right.
I believe when Jesus said, turn the other cheek, love your enemy, Peter, put your sword away, he meant it.
Okay.
I mean, he was probably pretty serious about that.
Got it.
And in fact, the meta-narrative, if he's willing to die, as opposed to defending himself, that's even more proof. I mean, that should be the biggest proof, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So, but the words that, it's, for example, if I walked in 2020 in a big Trump rally and said, you guys believe in freedom, they're going to shout and cheer. Hell yeah, we do, I could walk across the street to the Democratic National Convention. Do you guys believe in freedom? Yes, we do. But freedom in these two camps means something wholly different. Just as you used to say, grace in the Mormon church is different than grace in the Christian faith, whatever that is.
Right.
So So I believe the communities that we are a part of form the narratives that we claim form meanings to words.
Okay.
Which is why I would never say, do you believe that evangelical Protestants are just as Christian as Methodists? I'd say no, because they've abandoned the historic Christian faith.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, a good Catholic could say, what about you as Methodist? And I'd say, you're right, you know. Yeah.
And Orthodoxy would say to the Catholics.
Yeah, Orthodoxy says to the Catholics, you're just the first Protestants.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they may be right. I mean, I can't refute that.
Mm-hmm.
I think Orthodoxy's right. Yeah.
So just to jump into that, knowing that about you now, as I've discerned that, why aren't you Orthodox?
Great question. Mostly I'm too scared.
Of?
Taking the faith too seriously. I'm too sinful. I just like my life, you know. I don't want to have to, like, you know, I said I have 1 foot in disbelief, 1 foot in total belief, you know. And
at least you're honest enough to admit that.
Yeah.
So you're not going to be a hypocrite and embrace it just for the sake of thinking it's probably more correct, because you realize you probably won't follow it.
I probably would if I did it.
If you did it.
I don't have the guts to do it. It's a serious thing to me. Yeah.
Well, that shows your
Plus, but I would also say, you know, I had a Methodist friend who once said, you know, being a Methodist is part of like being a dysfunctional family. I mean, in the end, it's still your family. So, I mean, Orthodoxy would say that Methodists are Christians, so maybe God wants to use me in the Methodist church to help Methodists be more Christian.
Got it.
You know, in a sense.
So we only have like 8 minutes left, but let me ask you this before. And remember, next week, Brian's going to be with us. And now that we've talked a little bit, I'm going to flesh out some more ideas to hear from him, because this is really fascinating, and he's so well spoken. Brian, you seem, tell me if I'm correct, you seem to differentiate between Christianity, Christians, those two are the same, and heaven, future state, salvation.
Yeah.
Those are two different things in your mind. I've heard you kind of reference that a couple times since we've talked. Explain that a little bit better to me. So we've got the evangelicals you don't agree with doing their thing on Sunday. We've got the Orthodox doing their thing. We've got the Catholics. We've got the Lutherans. We've got you. We've got the Presbyterian Orthodox Presbyterians. We've got the Mormons. We've got Jehovah's Witnesses. What you're saying, if I get it right, is most of those aren't doing Christianity, because it's not proven from the fathers, it's not proven from the Mass, it's not proven from history or the Bible. But you don't step back and say, therefore, they're all going to hell.
No, I would say, I would say those who have something to reject are in the greatest dangers of the fires of hell, if there is such a thing.
That caveat at the end, I gotta ask you
so
about
like
that.
I would think that somebody like me has a much greater chance of going to hell than somebody on the streets who's never experienced what I've experienced.
And what will
John
prohibit
15 is an example. You know, Jesus says, if I had not come and shown you, I mean, this is a gross paraphrase, but if I had not come and shown you guys the way, disciples, you wouldn't have all this burden on you, but I have now. So it's up to you.
You got it on your back now,
Yeah.
So just having said that, Brian, what will help prevent you from going to hell? I mean, just intellectually, what could you lay on the table that would help Brian Diggs not go to hell? What can you do more of? What can you do better?
Well, I mean, I think submission to the church, you know, like there's a little church I've been helping out here in town, and there are these two people that sit there. I mean, they are, you know, hardworking, honest, blue collar, you know, I look at them and they bring lunch for everybody every week. They don't have a lot of money. When I look at them and their humbleness, they say, I'm going to be in church. So to answer your question, I think I'm submitting myself to a group of people that I have relatively little in common with most of the time. I mean, for example, when I was at First Methodist, they were like, you know, why can't we have a glossy brochure like South Mountain, whatever, you know, church, you know? It's like, all right, I'll give you a brochure. So I got 11.5 by 8, you know, fold it into 3, you know. It was just black and white right off the printer. This is back in like the early 2000s. And it just had lightning bolts on the front. And you'd open it up, and it said, welcome to First United Methodist Church on the bottom. and you open it up and it says, have you ever wanted to hang out with people you have relatively little in common with, give away most of your extra money and miss football on Sundays, then this might be the place for you. So what I was trying to help the people understand on that is that we get this conception by a lot of Protestant churches and Catholic churches that church is going to help you be better and make you happier. And I would suggest that church shouldn't make you happier. It should make you more joyful. But your life should be a lot harder if you take it seriously.
I see. So in summary, you're sort of saying church gives you an opportunity to die to yourself because you're associating with people who, and that's right there, an automatic built-in benefit of gathering together with people is that you don't necessarily like them. They're not your necessarily your friends. So right there, it's an opportunity. The Mormons say that's huge within the Mormon church. It's a chance for you to have all your rough edges worn off by having to serve with everyone else.
Yeah.
But let me ask you.
And that's what baptism is. It's the dying to the self.
Sure. Buried with Christ.
Yep.
And then rise to new life.
In a sense, it's an exorcism is what the early church called it.
Whoa. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So, Brian, if that's the case, do you see, what is the difference? Explain to me in the last minute, what is the difference then from my perspective, which is to come to the church and hear the word, take it out into your life, and then associate with the people on the job, your neighbors, your non-member friends, your non-Christian people, all week long, and let your Christianity get rubbed off in your engagements with them as you're shining his light to him. What's the difference between that experience in the community with a believer and having it happen within a brick and mortar building?
The Eucharist.
So it's all down to the communion.
If Jesus said, I'm going to meet you on the corner of 9th and 9th in Salt Lake City, would you go?
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't say to yourself, I think I'll just stay home and think about Jesus.
Right.
You'd rush down to the coffee garden and see Jesus. And Christians believe at the table that Jesus is present.
He also said to eat this until I come, which is why my eschatology automatically puts a damper on that, because that was for them under those circumstances to partake and unify because of the horrificness. But now that community is not, and that's why we can't maintain that community in this world. You have to almost become a highly legalistic system of rules and rituals and regulations within your special group in order to keep that going. And I
you do.
Yeah,
exactly.
You do. And I just think that that's us keeping it going when God says, I've taken care of it, man. Now get out there. Get out there and let me live in you, and let's just do this thing.
The problem I have with that is, how would you ever know he's living in you? I mean, here's an example.
The love.
The problem I have also is when you say your eschatology. Red flag for somebody like me, right? I'm just not interested in anybody's personal eschatology.
Well, it's not my personal.
Because you'd never know what eschatology is if it weren't for the church.
No, you wouldn't know if it wasn't for the word. The church.
There is no word without the church.
Okay, but couldn't God have used Constantine and...
Could have, but he didn't. That's the difference. He didn't.
Whoa. Couldn't he have used Erasmus? Couldn't he have used all of these people to put the word together, the printing press and everything? You're saying no, he absolutely emphatically didn't. No room for...
he didn't. He could have used purple turtles.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He chose the church.
He chose what church?
He created the church that started at Pentecost, the church that had real bishops and real priests and real deacons, the church that said, this is how you baptize, this is how you celebrate the Eucharist. Churches that were doing this stuff while the Word, the Bible, was being written.
Was there an authority with that church?
In my opinion, absolutely. Much looser than it is now, but yes.
And was the authority maintained or retained on earth?
In my opinion, absolutely.
We're going to cut it off at that. This is so fascinating. Because what we've met here, we've had Bartosiewicz on here, who's went from Mormonism to Orthodoxy. We've had, of course, Father Christopher, who represents Catholicism. We had Michael Imperiali, who represents Presbyterianism. But now we have a soldier who is he is willing to battle now. There's none of this niceties of let's get along. This dude wants to battle for there being a way that has come through. The thing that's great about Brian is he doesn't say, I'm going to embrace it. I'm too weak of a man, but I'm going to stand for it. It's what's right and it's what's true. Join us next week here in Heart of the Metal as we continue to talk about this with Brian Diggs. See you next week.
Thanks,
Awesome.
brother.
Awesome. Really great.
You sure?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Really great. Let's keep going.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's take right off on this platform.
Definitely, yeah. No, I love this stuff. I just don't want to be.
No. No, it's good. It's all good.